This is North Country Public Radio. It's 8 o'clock. Excuse me. Good morning. This is Northern Light for Monday, August 21st. I'm Monica Sandreski. Todd is away for the rest of the week. The city of Plattsburgh lost an appeal aimed at saving a major downtown housing project, but the mayor says the project is not dead yet.
Adding 100 families to the heart of our downtown would do nothing but increase the popularity of downtown and the success of our small businesses downtown. Also, advocates for honeybees are urging Governor Kathy Hochul to sign a bill that would ban a pesticide linked to beehive die-offs. And in an era of divided politics and shouting more than conversation, a group in the Adirondacks is trying to find common ground.
There's a lot of long conversations that happen, phone calls, after hours, and I've been there as well, sort of on the ledge. This is too difficult. This relationship is broken. This issue is too hard to face.
More from Brian Mann coming up. Also on the show, we check in with NCPR book reviewer Betsy Capus. All of that and more is coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us. Support for Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio comes from the Village Mercantile, bringing Saranac Lake to places beyond the Adirondacks, offering Adirondack-made and inspired goods, villagemerc.com, anything but general, and by Apothecary Chocolates, making gourmet chocolates by hand from all natural herbs, botanicals, and tree syrups, apothecarychocolates.com. This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski. The city of Plattsburgh has lost an appeal to save a major downtown development project, but the mayor says the project is not dead yet. Champlain Valley reporter Kara Chapman has more.
Back in 2016, Plattsburgh was one of the first communities in the state to receive a $10 million Downtown Revitalization Initiative grant. The biggest chunk, $4.3 million, was awarded to Prime Plattsburgh, LLC. The company had proposed the construction of a mixed-use development with more than 100 apartments on the current Durkee Street parking lot downtown. But the project faced opposition from some local business owners and residents who came together as the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition. That group and others sued to stop the project and won. In early 2022, Clinton County Supreme Court tossed out the city permit approvals for the development. The city decided to appeal, but on Thursday, an appellate court handed down the same result. The judges said the city had not come up with a sufficient plan to deal with contaminated soil beneath the existing lot. In a statement, the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition said it was pleased. The group called it, quote, a win for everyone who wants sensible development in the city. But it said the fight's not over yet.
No, the project's not dead.
That's Plattsburgh Mayor Chris Rosenquist. He says the city plans to meet with the project's developer, Prime, and Empire State Development today to talk about next steps. Rosenquist says it all hinges on whether Prime wants to continue with the project. The mayor himself is opposed to the development's size and scope, but he says ultimately the city needs housing, so he'll support Prime if they want to move forward.
Adding 100 families to the heart of our downtown who are out here shopping, using services, using our parks, spending time downtown, and utilizing all that downtown has to offer would do nothing but increase the popularity of downtown and the success of our small businesses downtown.
Rosenquist says he does not know what will happen to the $4.3 million if Prime decides to pull out, but he hopes Empire State Development will allow the city to use the money to find another developer to bring housing to the Durkee Street site. In its statement, the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition members said they, quote, look forward to collaborating with Mayor Rosenquist and the city to unite the community in a positive spirit moving forward. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio.
The Department of Defense has denied a $20 million grant for the city of Watertown. The city hoped it would help pay for a $50 million overhaul of Watertown's water treatment plant. For years, 2 contaminants have been regularly found at above acceptable levels at the plant. They're byproducts of the disinfection process. The city is under a federal EPA order to get those levels under control. The Watertown City Council has agreed to bond the $50 million project, but had hoped to get financial aid from the state and federal government. In a recent city council meeting, some council members criticized previous expenditures, like the purchase of the former Watertown Golf Club and spending $7 million on a new public pool. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has approved New York's request for a federal disaster designation after last spring's late frosts. The designation will provide emergency relief funds to farmers after the late May frost devastated orchards and vineyards in 31 counties across New York. It destroyed the majority of many crops, including grapes and apples. New York is the second largest producer of apples in the country and the third largest producer of grapes. Counties eligible for the funds include Jefferson, Oswego, Washington, and Saratoga counties. One of the biggest themes in American culture today is its civic fabric is fraying. From local school board meetings to Congress, shouting often overwhelms real conversation. But a group in the Adirondacks is actively working to resist that trend. NPR's Brian Mann reports.
To understand the civic experiment underway in New York's massive Adirondack Park, we have to go back to a time when things were really ugly. In the 1990s, a CBS cameraman captured a violent confrontation. An environmental activist was attacked by a local government leader named Maynard Baker.
Go back wherever you come from, but get out of here, out of our lives and out of our business.
The Adirondack Park is 6 million acres. Small towns here are surrounded by big chunks of heavily regulated land. Historian Phil Terry says the fight over environmental rules turned dangerous.
There was an attempt to set the park agency headquarters on fire. One of the park agency staff members had bullets flying around his car one day.
In a lot of ways, the Adirondacks then resembled America today. Conspiracy theories and threats of violence were commonplace.
I had protesters and pickets all over the Adirondacks.
Former New York Governor George Pataki, a Republican, lives now in the park. He says the stakes were high. When he took office, huge tracts of privately owned land in the park were being eyed by developers. They wanted to build resorts and waterfront vacation homes. Pataki unveiled an ambitious environmental plan to keep that from happening. Here he is speaking in 2005.
This brings our total open space conserved to over 900,000 acres, an area bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island.
Pataki says the battle lines then were pretty much like what we see now across the U.S. Pro-business versus pro-environment, urban versus rural, people looking for agreement versus those who wanted to fight. He says his message to furious locals was simple. Let's start talking.
Give me a chance, and I think we can make this work both for the environment and for the economy.
People here say that moment started a gradual shift in the park's culture that took root over the next 20 years, creating an opening for a new generation of activists.
Our agenda is simply to have civil discourse.
Zoe Smith is an environmental activist who sits on the board of the Adirondack Park Agency. That's the state governing body locals once tried to burn down. She lives here in Saranac Lake, one of the towns inside the park, and volunteers for a group called the Common Ground Alliance that formed to do the slow, hard work of building bridges.
There's a lot of long conversations that happen, phone calls, after hours, and I've been there as well, sort of on the ledge. This is too difficult. This relationship is broken. This issue is too hard to face.
People here say this local work has been complicated by forces now tearing at America's civil society. The park's small towns backed Donald Trump twice, and voters here have given landslide victories to Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, a Trump ally who frequently amplifies conspiracy theories. In other parts of the U.S., bitter national divisions have shattered communities. But here, local government leaders like Jerry Delaney have chosen to keep talking.
I feel I'm a moderate, but oftentimes I'm told I'm very right of moderate.
Delaney's a town official, a former logger and corrections officer who describes himself as a Trump voter. He's also emerged as one of the leading pro-development voices working with the Common Ground group.
There's no good to tear our communities apart. We're not going to win by fighting. As long as people are listening to us, we still have a chance.
Local leaders like Delaney wound up supporting those big land conservation deals. In exchange, small towns got big pots of economic development money and funding for infrastructure. Historian Phil Terry says while America grew more fractious, the Adirondacks found ways to compromise.
I think there's been a lot of good faith effort on the part of people on both sides to try to talk things out. Don't yell at each other, talk to each other.
Everyone interviewed for this story said the Adirondack experiment has been successful so far, but also messy. They say the peace here often feels fragile, shaken by occasional lawsuits and by angry flare-ups on social media. But Zoe Smith with the Common Ground Alliance says people here keep talking, in part because they know how bad things can be when neighbors turn against neighbors.
I think people don't want to go back there. They remember it. When you hear people talk about the Adirondack Wars and the Adirondack battles, there are very few people who want to engage in that again.
So far, nearly 1 million acres of wild forest and lakes have been protected here with local buy-in and local input. Makes you wonder what could be done in other parts of the U.S. if people started talking again, rather than making threats and shouting each other down. Brian Mann, NPR News in New York's Adirondack Park.
This story first aired on NPR's All Things Considered. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 10 after 8. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Todd is still away for the rest of the week, but he will be back next Monday. Coming up on the show, Betsy Capus reviews 2 books for us this August. That's coming up right here on Northern Light, which is supported by St. Lawrence Health, whose affiliation with Rochester Regional Health means more patient access to specialty care. StLawrenceHealthSystem.org. And by the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake, presenting a full season of events and activities, now open 7 days a week. Tickets at theadkx.org. Music now by Dan Berggren out of Ballston Spa. A local internet and phone service company is planning to bring residential fiber service into the village of Messina. Slick Fiber in Nickelville says its all-fiber network will bring higher internet speeds into the center of town. Slick says it's working with the Messina Public Works Department to plan at digging where utilities are currently buried. The company hopes to start service in mid-September. And the Crandall Public Library in Glens Falls recently received a $500,000 donation from Christopher Bennett, a Queensbury native. He made the donation in honor of his mother, Anna Bennett, and aunts Helen Whittemore and Mary Jones. The library says this donation is the largest individual gift it's received outside of a late 2000s capital campaign to renovate and expand the library. The library plans to use the money on tech improvements, including updating its computer room. Saturday was World Honeybee Day, and New York environmental groups were urging Governor Kathy Hochul to sign a bill that would ban a pesticide linked to hive die-off. The bill has already passed both chambers of the state legislature. From Albany, Karen DeWitt reports.
World Honeybee Day, held on the third Saturday in August every year, is an effort to remind people of the importance of honeybees as pollinators for human food sources. It also aims to draw awareness to the dangers that bees face, including hive die-offs, which studies have found are as high as 48% a year. The bill, approved in the Senate and Assembly earlier this year, would ban the use of pesticides known as neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. The chemical is used to coat seeds, including corn and soybean seeds, to help farmers more easily control harmful pests. Advocates of the measure, known as the Birds and Bees Protection Act, include the NRDC's Dan Rachel. He says neonics are among the most potent pesticides ever created and are contributing to the decline of the honeybee population.
We now know that their ecologically destructive impacts are likely worse than any class of pesticides since DDT.
Hudson Valley beekeeper Peter Nelson says the losses are not sustainable.
The neonics affect the bees' nervous systems, reproduction, and cognitive functions, which stresses and weakens honeybee colonies and makes them more susceptible to other pathogens and parasites.
Rachel with NRDC says 95% of the seed coatings leach into soil and water supplies, causing harm to other animals. He points to a May 2023 EPA study. It found that neonic usage is endangering over 200 species, including potentially humans.
We see evidence of that vast contamination all over New York water supplies and the bodies of New Yorkers, with a recent study finding neonics in the bodies of over 95% of pregnant women tested in New York and 4 other states.
The European Union has already banned the pesticide. Senate sponsor Brad Hoylman-Siegel says if Governor Hochul signs the measure, New York would be the first state in the U.S. to limit the use of neonics. He says with New York being a major agricultural producer, the change could disrupt the chemical pesticide industry.
This is an issue of critical importance. I trust the governor recognizes the need to rein in these dangerous chemicals, and I implore her to sign the bill.
The chemical industry and the state's Farm Bureau opposed the ban. When the measure was passed in June, Farm Bureau President David Fisher said in a statement that eliminating neonics as seed coating would only lead to farmers having to spray crops with potentially harmful airborne pesticides. In a video produced by the Farm Bureau, Geneseo farmer Brad McCauley of Merrimack Farms explains the pesticide's benefits to growers.
The reason we use neonicotinoids and other crop protectives are to safeguard us from having crop failures. Products that we're using prior to neonicotinoids were very harmful to the farmer as well as some wildlife.
The Farm Bureau points to a USDA study that finds that a type of mite, not neonics, is the biggest cause of honeybee colony die-off. Some New York farmers disagree, though. Corinne Hench and her family operate the organic Loving Mama farm near Amsterdam, New York.
Farmers like me, we rely upon insects, i.e. pollinators, for our fruiting crops and our seed crops. Plus, we rely upon beneficial insects for pest control. To be brutally clear, without pollinators, we face living in a world without fruits or vegetables.
Governor Hochul does not normally comment on pending legislation. A spokesman would only say that the governor is reviewing it. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
Keep up with news from throughout the state and from the NCPR newsroom at our website, ncpr.org, or you can follow the station on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. It's just about 20 after 8. Coming up in just a minute, Betsy Capus stops by to review a couple of books for us for the month of August. Then stick around after the show for Bird Note, How Birds Pass Down Their Song Over Millennia. That's coming up at 8:42. First, we got to take a look at the weather forecast. It's 64 degrees in Boonville right now, 66 in Saranac Lake, 71 in Queensbury, and 63 degrees in Fort Covington. We can expect cloudy skies for much of the region today, with highs around 70 degrees for much of the area down in the southern Adirondacks, like in the Queensbury Lake George area. Should be partly sunny skies in the forecast today. Overnight tonight should be mostly clear with lows a little bit chillier, lows in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees. And tomorrow in the weather forecast, mostly sunny skies expected with highs in the mid to lower 70s. Two recent young adult books take on the difficult topics of drug addiction, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the repatriation of Native bones and artifacts. Our book reviewer Betsy Capus talked with Todd Moe about the novels Firekeeper's Daughter and Warrior Girl on Earth by Chippewa writer Angeline Booley.
Todd, how do you find books that you think you might want to read?
You know, I find them online, maybe through the internet, or it might be a newspaper article. Sometimes it's a book review. Sometimes it's word of mouth. Yeah.
So, obviously, I'm a book reviewer, and I like to read other people's book reviews. So that's how I usually find new books. But in this case, it's kind of strange. I actually noticed Bouley's book first at the Syracuse airport. My flight had been delayed for hours, so of course, I went to the only place that had books, one little spot in a convenience store. I saw this beautiful cover, what looked like a stylized butterfly made of the profiles of two girls. The book, Firekeeper's Daughter, won the prestigious Michael L. Prince Award for Best Young Adult Novel of 2022.
Nice. A new book, and you had time to start reading it.
Right. Yes. It was a long delay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever read any young adult novels, but they usually have a romance or two, a breakup or two, some serious topics, and lots of action. Firekeeper's Daughter had all this, plus it's set in the Upper Peninsula, the UP of Michigan, on a Chippewa reserve near Sault Ste. Marie. It kind of reminded me of Akwesasne, with a bridge to Canada and lots of ice hockey.
So, a northern people in place, just like we have here.
Yep. And in Firekeeper's Daughter, there's a serious drug problem in the community with a couple of young people dying from overdoses. The main character, Donis, is a high school student who's secretly gathering information for the FBI. As you can imagine, she gets herself into some dangerous situations.
But does it end happily ever after?
Not really. And I admire Bouley for not tying up all the loose ends. It made it seem more like real life.
Okay, how about the second book, the one that was just published, Warrior Girl Unearthed?
Bouley takes on other difficult topics in this novel. The main character, Perry Firekeeper Birch, is the bad twin in a pair of identical twins. After getting caught speeding, Perry has to do a summer internship at the Tribal Museum. Not something she wants to do. And then she is shocked to discover that museums in the United States are not repatriating Indigenous skeletons and artifacts as they are required to do by law. So she shoplifts some antique black ash baskets at a tour shop and anonymously returns them to their Ojibwe families.
Wait, so she was stealing from the stealer?
Yep. And she thinks that the owner of the shop, Frank Lockhart, a white man, has more artifacts on his land on Sugar Island. She takes her friend Shensei with her to his property and pretends to be bird watching as she looks around. Here's Perry after Shensei asks her what she knows about the area, which used to be owned by a Chippewa family. The way I heard it, all this land belonged to the Nodine family. They sold bits and pieces during hard times. My mom said that used to happen a lot. At some point, Frank Lockhart's father started collecting 10-acre parcels like baseball cards. After the tribe built the casino and tribal citizens had good jobs and started getting per capita payments, families like the Nodines tried buying back their land. By then, Frank Lockhart had built a large home and wasn't interested in selling.
So I'm curious, does Perry find more artifacts on that land?
Worse than that. She finds a silo where someone has a hoard of Indigenous bones and artifacts. She decides to do her own repatriation of these bodies with the help of her friends and some elders. This becomes the thriller part of the book, especially when, just before the heist, Shinsei goes missing.
Wow. Cue the scary music.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have to say that Bouli was perhaps putting a bit too much historical background into the story. Good stuff, but it was slowing down the action. Then the book began galloping along in the last 70 pages.
Okay, so who do you think should read these two novels? Teen girls?
Yeah, I'd say they're the major reading group, but I have to admit, older readers do that again. Sure, it's designed for teens and boys too, but older readers also like to read young adult novels, including myself, and these two books fill a gap. They're about contemporary Native Americans and the struggles they face. Bouli used to work as the director for the Office of Indian Education, and she has lots to share.
Well, listen, thanks for browsing at that airport convenience store, Betsy. And, both of these novels sound really interesting.
They are. Educational and exciting. The best combination.
Yeah.
See you next month, Todd.
Todd Moe talking with our book reviewer, Betsy Capus, who lives, works, and writes in Colton. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio, which is supported by Seagull Festival in Scroon Lake, bringing opera and musical theater to the Adirondacks since 1915. More at seagullfestival.org. And by Brookfield Renewable US, a provider of clean, renewable, and locally sourced hydropower, reminding listeners to please use caution when recreating near hydroelectric dams and as water conditions can change quickly.
Summer I might have drowned, but I held my breath and I kicked my feet and I moved my arms around, This summer I swam in the ocean and swam in a swimming pool. Salt my wounds, cleaned my eyes, I'm a self-destructive fool, self-destructive fool. Butterfly and the old Australian crawl. This summer I swam in a public place in a reservoir to boot. At the latter I was informal, at the former I wore my suit. I wore my swimming suit, Summer I did swan dives and jackknives for you all. And once when you were looking, I did a cannonball. This summer I went swimming. This summer I might have drowned, but I held my breath and I kicked my feet and I moved my arms around,
Swimming song by the Montreal-based folk duo Kate and Anna McGarrigle right here on Northern Light. That is it for the show for the day. Morning Edition continues in just a couple of minutes. Then stick around after that for the Marketplace Morning Report. Coming up between 8:51 and 9 o'clock, a new report shows global wealth inequality fell in 2022. So what's caused the gap between the rich and poor to narrow? That plus all the morning's business news just ahead at 8:51 right here on NCPR. We want to know what is going on in your world. Is there something that we should be knowing about or something we should be reporting on? Many of the stories that you hear on Northern Light have come to us from listeners who have reached out and said, hey, this is going on and I think it's important. Send an email. We would love to hear from you. news@ncpr.org. And if you miss an episode of the show, never fear. You can listen back to the archive any place you get your podcasts. While you're there, subscribe to our daily news roundup, Story of the Day, where you'll hear the biggest stories in our region and get the latest on the day's news. All of that hosted by David Summerstein. You can also listen live to the show every weekday evening at 5:48. That's it for the show. I'm Monica Sandreski. It's 8:30. I hope you have